welcome to the Summer 2023 Revenova 7.9 release webinar. My name is Dave Romanchuk, and I'm the Director of Product Management here at RevenovaTMS. And today I'm joined in this webinar by two of our all-star product managers, Liam Purcell and Alyssa Norcross.
Hello.
Today we're going to be taking you through an overview of all of the new features and functions that are present in the 7.9 release, and focusing in particular on some of the newest features that we're most excited about. To start the discussion, I'll be going through a high-level PowerPoint, hopefully painless, that touches on most of the new product features, and then I'll be handing it off to Liam and Alyssa for some more in-depth demos of the features we're most excited about. We're very excited to get into the demo here, so without further ado, let's go. So just a bit of housekeeping. As a reminder, as we've done in previous webinars, you can find all of the recorded webinars on the Revenova Learning Center, the RLC, and at the end of this webinar, we'll be sending out the link to the recording and the presentation deck after the event. Also, as a reminder, throughout the webinar, if you do have questions that come up, please post those questions in the Q&A forum as indicated on the RingCentral webinar controls. Meeting the team again, in case you guys have forgotten what a good-looking group you have here at Revenova. Dave, Alyssa, and Liam are going to be your presenters here today. And with that, let's dive into the review. So just to highlight, this is a major product release for us. As I mentioned, we're very excited about it, and we have, in fact, over 75 new product items included in this 7.9 release. And of those 75 plus items, some of the items that we're going to review today include both the enhancements and the new features as part of this review. The enhancements are related to the rate entry, lane, zone, and RFP objects, significant enhancements to the Rate IQ tool, the carrier markup groups, customer portal, and lastly, the SMC3 API. Then in addition to all of the enhancements for the existing functionality, we also have new features that we're very excited about. And those three that we'll touch on today are the customer invoicing automation, performance IQ, and barcode generator. So the first enhancement on the list is the rate entry and lane/zone enhancements. And what you'll notice is throughout this presentation, I have asterisks on the slides, which indicate that these are actually features that Liam and Alyssa will be diving into the details more for a live demo at the end of my PowerPoint slides here. So just to hit the highlights, the first item on the list here is the new lane match priority that can be overridden at a rate entry level. So in the past, when you've entered a lane, there's been a standard default match priority, which determines the priority that a given lane is given based on the rate entry. And with this new enhancement, you'll have the ability to override that match priority. In addition, for rate entries, we now support a per handling unit position rate method. And also, the rate entries created from the RFP rate entry related list will maintain the RFP context. Lastly, on the zone entry aspect, we've enhanced these to allow for mixed zone entry types for any combination of country, state, city or state, zip 3, zip 5, postal code, and/or location. And we've also enabled the ability to include and exclude geographies from a zone for these lane matching purposes. So you can imagine you can get extremely creative and with the different ways that you can set up these zone entries. On the RFP front, the RFP banner now supports accessorial rate entry uploads, API rate method uploads, SMC3 LTL API field uploads, upload of customer and carrier rate entries for the customer RFP, and upload of multiple carrier services in a single RFP. So a significant enhancement to the existing RFP functionality based on a lot of feedback that we've gotten from you guys as our customer base. The next item, which will be touched on in one of the live demos, is the Rate IQ enhancements. And for those of you that heard us at FreightWaves, we're actually very excited about the enhancements to this tool for this release. So just to start, the Rate IQ calculation tool now supports the match priority and lane fields. The match priority is defaulted to the lane's value but can be manually overridden. And the lowest match priority rate calculation that also matches on the load will be used in the widget. So what does that mean? In the past, for the Rate IQ calculations, you really only had the mode as the selection for which criteria would be driving the calculations on a load-by-load basis. But with the lane and the match priority new fields, you can now define different calculation rules based on both the lane and then also the overriding match priority. The rate calculation rule setup page has been replaced with a Lightning Web component, so that's what you're seeing on the screen here. And then the last item that we're probably most excited about is that RateIQ now supports custom data sources. So the custom data sources can either be imported and deleted via either a web service or a CSV uploader. So you can think of things like, we've had multiple different partners ask about potential integrations to certain AI tools that can feed data into RateIQ. And so with this new publicly exposed API, you can now push these data sources into your RateIQ calculations. Then on the other side of things, if you have just a simple CSV export that perhaps you get sent to you by belonging to a particular shipper consortium or something to that effect, you can use that CSV upload tool to upload those rates into the rate calculation rule. Next one, kind of a small but important new feature, and that's the overriding of the customer invoice document requirements. So as it says, this new feature will allow users to override the invoice document requirements on an invoice-by-invoice basis. So as many of you know, we have a significant or a well-developed integration with HubTran, now TriumphPay, that allows you to identify all of the particular documents that might be required from a POD perspective for the customer. But when you have instances where perhaps the load didn't move, maybe it's a TONU invoice that you're sending to the customer, there wasn't really a way to override the invoice document requirements, and so this new checkbox allows you to do that. Now moving on to one of our new features that we're excited about, this is Performance IQ, and this is another one that will be live demoed later in the meeting. As it says, the Performance IQ is a new component available on the home page, and it's basically used as an overall monitoring widget for all of the Salesforce org limits and your TMS batch jobs. It's capable of displaying current status of all of your org limits, sending out email alerts when the org limits are exceeded, and also sending out email alerts for when certain batch job fails. The next enhancement on the list we have is all around container tracking enhancements. A new field called the master bill of lading number on the load and container objects can now be used to initiate container tracking. The vessel the container is on is now captured by the Project 44 status updates. The UN location code of ports is now captured on the container route information field. And lastly, the container console now supports multi-row field updates. So you can do multiple updates from that widget now. The next very exciting new feature is our customer invoicing automation. And all of this revolves around fully automating the system for as few touches as possible. So with this new feature, it gives you the ability to auto-generate and send customer invoices that have been added to the TMS, which is performed by a new custom batch job. The customer billing settings are available on the transportation profile of the customer, and these new settings include a setting for indicating that this customer should receive auto-sent invoices. You can define the day of week or a daily billing setting. You can define the billing email attachment format, whether that be a PDF or a PDF with the CSV. And lastly, with that CSV option, you also have the option to define the explicit CSV export file definition, meaning if one customer has certain requirements for their CSV, you can define it in one way, and then you can set up a different CSV for a different customer in another way. The next enhancement on the list is the SMC3 LTL API enhancement. So a lot of significant enhancements to the SMC3 API that you'll see here. Admittedly, I'm no SMC3 expert, and Liam and Alyssa will talk to you more about this, or I suppose we all will moving forward. But the pieces that I wanted to highlight in this presentation are, in particular, the freight charge itemization rating and invoicing enhancements. So the first one on the list is the tariff minimum. So now we capture that tariff minimum for customer and carrier quotes. Secondly, the freight charges and freight charges after discount are also captured on customer quotes. And then thirdly, the SMC3 minimum charge, floor charge, TMS rate entry maximum, and rate entry minimum will be captured on both the customer and the carrier quote freight charge items when they're applicable. So if all this seems Greek to you, not to worry, but for those that do use SMC3 and are heavy users of that, you're going to be very excited about this new feature. So for the customer invoices that are associated with these SMC3 quotes, the fields listed in these prior bullets will be shown on the invoice PDF, so that's very important for customers that receive these kinds of invoices. And then also there will be text indicators on the invoice PDF that will show if one of these special rates was applied from SMC3. And then lastly, for customer invoices that are associated with the SMC3 quotes that are sent via EDI, the deficit charge will now be captured as a charge item as well as the items listed in the prior bullet. So again, a very significant uplift to the SMC3 invoicing and quoting features here. And then lastly, in regards to the SMC3 integration, in the context of that API's rating, users can set up rate entries to make discounts behave like surcharges. So unlike ordinary discounts where you're obviously reducing a freight charge based on a discount, you can actually now create negative discounts which will increase your freight charges. And this is important when it comes to historical negotiations that some customers have with their customers based on these tariff rates where you need to be able to assign negative discounts to align the historical contracts. Next, we have the quote and invoice cost detail enhancements. So another asterisk here indicating that we'll be diving into this one a little bit further. But at a high level, basically the freight and fuel surcharge fields that are captured on the customer and carrier quotes, those are now going to be available on the customer and carrier invoices. So that includes the unit price, quantity, and the notes. These fields are also passed in the outbound EDI 210 customer invoice transactions. And all of these fields are actually now configurable to show or to hide these details on the various PDFs that are created within the system. So on the right-hand side, you have a snapshot of these additional new features, including the unit, the quantity and price, and then any notes. And as I mentioned, it's configurable whether you want to show all of these details or not. The next significant enhancement is around carrier markups. So as it says, carrier markups are now defined with configurable item level granularity, and different markups can be applied for each customer quote cost item. So what that means is you can have different markups based on freight, fuel, and accessorial all individually. You can also define blanket fuel surcharge or accessorial specific markups. And then the third bullet here, the carrier markup cascade from customer specific to global TP markups function independently for each cost item. So you might have a global markup for freight, for example, and then a customer specific markup for fuel. Next, the SMC3 only fields have been added for each valid value of freight charge applied. And lastly, the stored rates and carrier markups can be used concurrently within the same quote. Stored rates take precedence when there is a match. So what does that mean? Again, we'll dive into the details of this one, but just to point out in the snapshot here, you'll see you can have on a single quote both rate entries that are auto-calculated for this particular quote and markups associated with the same quote. So kind of a mix of both rate entry and carrier markups. Next, we have some customer portal enhancements. The first being you can now request a faster transit time. So we've added a new button to the customer portal quote selection page, which allows the user, when they're looking through their quotes, to request a faster transit time as required. And based on the selection of that button, then they'd be given a modal that pops up and asks them to enter their requested delivery date and then perhaps some comments that they might have for that request. In addition, we have some new threshold parameters that have been added to the portal section of the customer transportation profile records. And what these thresholds work to achieve is essentially if the portal user that's entering loads in the system, if they've entered a load that exceeds these thresholds, then the system will prevent them from tendering the load to the carrier through the portal. And what happens is the user, or I should say the system prevents the user from tendering the load, which is typically done when you have LTL loads that potentially could fall in between an LTL versus a volume LTL load. So the thresholds are kind of there to protect you from exceeding the thresholds. The next new feature that we have is the barcode generation, another one that we'll be demoing here. And Revenova is now integrated with Tekkit, which enables generation of barcodes. There's a new section, a new settings sub-tab on the carrier transportation profile, which contains all of the available settings for defining these barcodes. So if you're familiar with barcodes, then most of these fields should make sense, but they're essentially items like the barcode type, code 128, the size of the barcodes, and then the length, width, and height, and things of that nature. These barcode images that can be generated are included in both the BOL and on the shipping label documents. And then the last slide before we dive into the actual demos are just some high-level hitters of the other enhancements that didn't warrant their own slide, but were nonetheless important to make sure we highlighted in this webinar. So I'm just going to run through these quickly, and then we'll move on to the demo. So the first one, Lightning email templates are now supported. So if you're familiar with the Salesforce Lightning email templates, those are effectively slightly more powerful email templates that you can create within the system. And once you've created them, you can in fact use them in the TMS as your standard rate con or invoice email templates. Next, accessorial exclusions can now be defined for specific carriers and carrier services to prevent the assignment of loads with specific accessorials to those carriers or carrier services. So if there are particular accessorials that a carrier tells you, hey, I don't move loads with this particular accessorial, then you can define that exclusion and they will be excluded from your carrier search, and the system will also prevent you from assigning a load to that carrier. In that same vein, you can also create carrier accessorial exclusion exceptions defined for specific customers. So again, as the example would be, a carrier normally doesn't support a particular accessorial, but for a perhaps big ticket customer, they want to win that customer's business, so you can assign that exception for that particular customer. The next bullet is the TMS is now integrated to Blue Yonder. So customers using Blue Yonder will be able to create loads in Revenova via an API. You'll be able to return rates for created loads to Blue Yonder. And lastly, you'll be able to tender loads in Revenova via API. Next, the rate and tariff minimum fields have been added to the pricing workbench CSV export. A new company type field is now populated on the TP for the carrier monitoring APIs. A containers tab has been added. And then a few of these other ones, even though they're short bullet points, are actually pretty significant impacts to the release. So I might dwell a little longer on some of these, most notably this one that I'm dwelling on right now, which is the majority of customer and carrier-facing documents generated by the TMS will be visible in portal components without the need to manually share. So some of you may have noticed in previous releases and with some of the transition to files and things of that nature, there was a slight limitation that required you to actually manually share files with portal users in order for them to see the documents in the portals that you've created. So what we've done in this release is we've actually, by default, exposed all of the documents when they get saved in the system to allow them to be visible within the portal. So it removes that extra step of manually needing to share these documents. The next one, the location field for the stops on the load detail component now uses account field sets, TMS4 and TMS5. So essentially just a more flexible way to search on location accounts in your stops when you're trying to find a particular account, either based on address or name or perhaps an account number. Another big significant item, even though it's one bullet point here, is the inbound EDI 210 transactions. So as you all are aware, with our existing EDI partners, you can certainly receive EDI 210s, or I'm sorry, you can certainly send EDI 210s from Revenova to your customers. And with this release, we're now enabling the reverse flow wherein carriers can actually send you EDI 210s into Revenova, which will then create vendor invoices in the system for you. Next, we have stored rate accessorials will be calculated on the FQA for customer and carrier quotes, even if there is no freight stored rate. Inbound EDI 204 and outbound EDI 214 transactions now support appointment time ranges. In the past, it was just a single appointment time. The BOL PDF now supports 50+ stop loads. The EDI status icon on the load detail LWC now supports many stop loads. And then optional configuration setting to allow line item, item number, and item description to appear at the bottom of the new load entry page. And lastly, the zip code is now an additional search option field in the customer and location search in the new load creation widget.